You want to put it in?" the nun screamed, and the mountain man's next act outraged the town. The small mountain town of Willow Creek had always been a place where everyone knew each other's names, birthdays, and even the smallest habits. Life moved slowly there. The mornings were quiet, with only the soft sound of birds and the occasional rumble of a passing truck. Children played near the creek, and the old wooden church, with its tall steeple and creaking doors, was the heart of the community. Nothing unusual ever happened. At least, nothing truly shocking. That was until the mountain man arrived. No one really knew his real name. Some said he had been wandering through the mountains for years, living alone in the forest, surviving off the land. Others whispered that he had once been a city man who had grown tired of the noise and chaos and had chosen solitude instead. He appeared suddenly one morning, walking into town with a heavy pack on his back, a long, unkempt beard, and clothes that had clearly seen better days. His boots were thick and covered in mud, his eyes bright and observant, and his hair tangled like the branches of the forest trees he had emerged from. The townspeople watched him cautiously. A few brave souls waved, but most stayed inside their houses, peeking from behind curtains. There was something almost magnetic about him, even though his appearance was rugged and rough. Children were both fascinated and frightened. Some called him the wild man of the mountains, while others whispered that he looked like someone out of a storybook, a character who had stepped straight out of the pages of a legend. The mountain man did not make a scene. He quietly rented a small cabin on the edge of town and began his days with a routine that was simple but unusual to the townsfolk. He chopped wood for his stove, carried water from the creek, and wandered through the town slowly, observing everything and everyone. People began to notice that he was not just a loner, he was helpful. When Mrs. Peterson's cart broke down, he fixed it without asking for anything. When the school needed firewood for the winter, he left logs at the schoolyard early in the morning. Despite his helpful nature, there was something about him that made people uneasy. He did not speak much. His voice was low, and when he did speak, it was thoughtful and precise. Yet there was a bluntness in his words that sometimes startled people. He said what he thought without filtering it for politeness. In a town where everyone tried to keep peace and avoid conflict, this was unusual. It all came to a head one Sunday morning at the church's annual charity fundraiser. The church, which was usually calm and solemn, was bustling with excitement. Tables were decorated with flowers, homemade pies were lined up for the bake sale, and the air smelled of fresh bread and coffee. Townspeople wore their Sunday best, chatting in small groups, smiling and enjoying the rare warmth of the winter sun streaming through the stained glass windows. The mountain man had been asked to help move some supplies to the church attic. He agreed without hesitation, nodding politely to Sister Agnes, who was in charge of the event. Sister Agnes was a strict but kind-hearted nun. She had lived in Willow Creek for decades and was known for her dedication to the community and the church. She had a sharp eye for detail and expected everyone to follow her instructions carefully. As he carried boxes up the narrow staircase to the attic, his large frame sometimes made it difficult to maneuver. One box in particular, heavy and awkward, caused a small commotion. Sister Agnes, noticing that he was struggling, walked over to assist. Her voice, sharp with concern and surprise, cut through the chatter of the room. "You want to put it in?" she asked, her tone a mixture of shock and disbelief. No one could believe what they had just heard. The words, though innocent in meaning, sounded startling when spoken aloud in the quiet church. The mountain man paused, turned, and looked at her. There was a flicker of amusement in his eyes, almost like a spark that dared the town to react. He smiled, a slow, calm smile, and simply nodded, as if acknowledging the challenge of fitting the box in the tight attic space. The moment was brief, but it was enough. Someone in the crowd had overheard the exchange and whispered it to their neighbor. The whisper traveled faster than the winter wind, moving from one person to the next until everyone in the church seemed to know. Faces turned from curiosity to shock. Children giggled quietly, not understanding why the adults looked so alarmed. The adults whispered, shook their heads, and some even laughed nervously to cover their surprise. For the mountain man, it was just a small misunderstanding. He had only been doing his job, carrying a heavy box into the attic, but for the townspeople, who were not used to anyone speaking or acting without following their strict social expectations, it was the beginning of something unusual. The quiet town of Willow Creek, which prided itself on tradition and propriety, was suddenly buzzing with gossip. After the fundraiser, people could not stop talking about the mountain man. At the general store, in the barber shop, even at the post office, his name came up. "Did you hear what happened at the church?" someone would ask. Another would nod, eyes wide. Some were angry at the audacity, while others were secretly delighted by the excitement. It was as if the mountain man had become a character in a story that the town could not look away from. Even Sister Agnes, who usually maintained her calm demeanor, found herself thinking about the encounter. She had never meant to cause such a stir. To her, it was simply a practical question about whether the box could fit. Yet the mountain man's reaction, his calm confidence, his unshakable presence, had left her unsettled. She realized that this was not just a stranger passing through. He was someone who would challenge the town's norms in ways they could not yet imagine. By the end of the day, the mountain man had returned to his cabin at the edge of town. He sat quietly by the fire, thinking about the events at the church. To him, life in Willow Creek was peaceful, but he could sense that he had already stirred the waters. Little did anyone know that this was only the beginning. The arrival of the mountain man marked a turning point for the town. His presence, his actions, and even his silence would soon become the center of attention. As night fell, the mountains surrounding Willow Creek were bathed in silver moonlight. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sounds of the town settling in for the night. Somewhere, a dog barked, and the mountain man looked out the window, thinking of the long path that had brought him here. He did not fully understand the stir he had caused, but he felt the quiet thrill of knowing that he had already made an impression. And so the quiet town that had once prided itself on predictability and order was now on the edge of change. The mountain man, with his quiet strength and unfiltered honesty, had become more than just a visitor. He had become a story, a mystery, and a challenge all at once. The townspeople could feel it in their hearts, though they did not yet know what was coming next. After the incident at the church, the mountain man's presence in Willow Creek became the center of attention. The townspeople could not stop thinking about him. They whispered in shops, on the streets, and even at the schoolyard, trying to understand this man who seemed so different from everyone else. Some were curious, some were wary, some even admired him secretly, though they would never admit it aloud. The mountain man, however, paid little attention to the gossip. He continued with his quiet routine, waking early in the morning to chop wood for his cabin stove, gathering water from the creek, and walking slowly through the town. He helped those who needed help without asking for recognition, but he never forced himself into conversations. His calm presence seemed to both intrigue and irritate the townspeople. One day, the mayor of Willow Creek decided it was time to get to know him better. Mayor Thompson was a kind but practical man who believed in keeping the peace. He invited the mountain man to his office under the pretense of a friendly welcome. When the mountain man arrived, he stood tall, looking around the small office. Observing the neat stacks of papers and the organized shelves, he nodded politely to the mayor, who cleared his throat nervously. "Welcome to Willow Creek," Mayor Thompson said. "We're glad to have you here. I hope you're settling in well." "Thank you, sir. The town is quiet, peaceful." "I like that." Mayor Thompson hesitated, unsure how to continue. Finally, he said, "I wanted to talk about the incident at the church." The mountain man's brow furrowed slightly, but he remained calm. "I only carried the boxes. I did not mean any trouble." I understand," the mayor said quickly. "But you see, our town is small. People are sensitive to anything unusual. It wasn't your fault. Still, well, the townspeople were surprised." The mountain man nodded, as if acknowledging the mayor's words. "I did not mean to surprise anyone. I only do what needs to be done." Despite the calm conversation, the town's curiosity only grew. People started inviting him to small events, hoping to learn more about him. At first, he politely declined most invitations. He preferred to observe quietly, watching the world around him. But over time, he began to accept small offers, always arriving quietly and leaving without drawing attention to himself. One afternoon, a few children found him sitting by the creek, skipping stones across the water. They were fascinated by the way he seemed completely at ease in the natural surroundings, moving with patience and focus. One of the children asked, "Do you live in the mountains all by yourself?" The mountain man nodded.
"Yes."
"I have always liked the quiet and the trees."
"They are good company," another child asked. "Don't you get lonely?"
"Sometimes, but there are always animals, the wind and the stars. They keep me company." The children giggled, enchanted by his words. They ran home to tell their parents, describing him as someone magical, someone different, someone worth paying attention to. Meanwhile, the adults were not so enchanted. The local newspaper printed a short story about him, calling him the mysterious newcomer of Willow Creek. The story described his rugged appearance, his strange habits, and the incident at the church. Some people laughed, some frowned, and some shook their heads in disbelief. Rumors began to spread, some true, some exaggerated. People speculated about his past, where he came from, and why he chose to live alone. Despite the whispers and rumors, the mountain man remained focused on his own work. He cleared trails around his cabin, repaired fences for neighbors, and even helped during the town's harvest season. Yet no matter how helpful he was, he could not escape the scrutiny of the townspeople. Every small action became a topic of discussion. When he carried firewood to an elderly neighbor, people praised him. When he walked silently past a group of children playing, some whispered that he was too quiet and too strange. The tension reached its peak during the town's preparations for the annual winter festival. The festival was the most important event of the year, bringing everyone together for music, food, and games. The mountain man was asked to help set up the festival decorations. Some residents hoped he would bring a fresh perspective, while others worried that he might do something unexpected. True to his nature, he worked diligently, but in a way that was slightly different from what the townspeople expected. He built a small stage out of wood in a corner of the square, arranging it carefully. He hung decorations in a pattern that some found unusual. When Sister Agnes passed by, she paused, looking at the decorations with her hands folded. "Your work is different," she said cautiously. The mountain man nodded. "Different is not always wrong. Sometimes it can be better," Problem added. The words puzzled her. She was used to traditions and rules, and the idea that something different could be better was not easy to accept. Still, she said nothing, only giving him a small nod. As the festival day approached, The townspeople grew anxious. They watched him work quietly, not knowing what he was planning. Some children were excited, sensing adventure. Some adults were nervous, fearing that his unconventional ways might disrupt the event. The anticipation in the town grew, creating a mix of excitement and tension. Finally, the festival began. Music filled the air, and the smell of roasted food drew people from every corner of the town. Children ran laughing, and the townspeople gathered to enjoy the festivities. The mountain man quietly observed from the edge of the square, noticing every detail: the way people laughed, the way families interacted, the way the decorations glimmered in the sunlight. Then, as the crowd grew comfortable, the mountain man stepped forward. He made a small adjustment to the stage he had built. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable at first, but as people began to perform on it, they realized that the stage had a strength and stability that no one expected. The decorations he had hung created patterns of light and shadow that made the festival more beautiful than ever. The townspeople were amazed. Many whispered among themselves, acknowledging that he had improved the festival without anyone realizing it. Even Sister Agnes, standing nearby, felt a mix of surprise and admiration. Perhaps different can be better, she thought quietly. By the end of the festival, the mountain man had gained the respect of most of the townspeople. Some still whispered, some still wondered about his past, but it became clear that he had a talent for helping the town in unexpected ways. The incident at the church was no longer the only story about him. Now he was seen as someone who could bring change, someone who could quietly challenge their expectations, and someone who could make the town better in ways they had never imagined. Still, not everyone was convinced. A few older townspeople remained skeptical, watching him carefully, waiting for another incident that might disrupt the peace. They whispered that perhaps he was too different, too unpredictable. But the majority had begun to accept him, intrigued by his quiet wisdom and unusual ways. And so, life in Willow Creek continued, but with a new energy. The mountain man had arrived as a stranger, mysterious and unconventional, but he was slowly becoming a part of the town. People were beginning to understand that his actions, though sometimes unusual, were guided by a thoughtful mind and a caring heart. He was no longer just a curiosity. He was a presence, a story, and a challenge, all at once. As winter crept over the mountains and snow began to blanket the town, the mountain man continued his quiet routines. He chopped wood, walked through the town, and helped wherever he could. Yet he knew that the story of the church and the festival was only the beginning. Something else, something bigger was waiting to happen, something that would test the town, challenge their ideas, and reveal just how much they could grow. The mountain man's quiet presence had settled into the rhythm of Willow Creek, but the townspeople still watched him closely. His calm ways had begun to earn him respect, yet there was a part of the town that could not stop wondering, what would he do next? People whispered in small groups, speculating about his habits, his past, and what unusual act might come from him in the future. Some hoped for something exciting, while others feared trouble. One morning he disappeared into the mountains for several days. Nobody knew exactly why. Some speculated he was gathering wood for the town or hunting, while others thought he might be exploring an old, hidden trail. Children pressed their noses against windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of him, and adults muttered to one another about the mysteries he carried. Even Sister Agnes found herself glancing toward the mountains, curious about his absence, though she would never admit it aloud. When he returned, he carried something large and unusual. Wrapped in cloth and secured carefully to his back, it was clear that it was not ordinary. He walked through the town slowly, giving curious glances at the people who peeked from windows and doorways. Whispers followed him wherever he went. "What is he carrying?" Where did he get it? Is it safe? Everyone wanted to know. By the next morning, the mountain man had quietly begun building something in the open field near the town square. At first, people thought it was some kind of fence or simple structure, but as he worked, stacking logs, twisting ropes, and carefully connecting wooden planks, it became clear that this was not ordinary construction. The structure grew taller and wider each day, strange shapes forming in the middle of the field. Townspeople began to gather around the edges, standing at a safe distance, peering over fences, and watching silently. He did not speak to anyone while working. He only nodded politely to those who approached and returned to his work. The children of the town followed at a safe distance, fascinated by the way he carefully measured, cut, and arranged the wood. Even the most skeptical adults began to admit to themselves that there was skill and creativity in his work. Something about the way he moved, precise and calm, suggested a careful mind behind the rough exterior. Sister Agnes could not resist going to see what he was doing. When she arrived at the edge of the field, she stood silently, hands folded, observing. The structure was unusual, a combination of stacked logs, angled supports, and woven wooden panels. It was taller than a man and wider than a small house. Its shape was unique, almost artistic, but she could not tell what it was meant to be. "Excuse me," she said carefully, her voice quiet so as not to startle him. "What? What is this for?" The mountain man looked at her, his eyes calm. "It is for the town," he said simply. "It will help you see things differently." Sister Agnes frowned slightly. "See things differently?" she asked, unsure of what he meant. "Yes," he said, returning to his work. "Sometimes change is easiest to understand when it is in front of your eyes." The next few days were filled with anticipation and tension. People from every corner of Willow Creek came to watch, some standing quietly, others whispering excitedly. Children ran around the field, asking questions, trying to imagine what the structure would become. Adults debated its purpose. Some thought it was an art project. Others feared it might be dangerous. But no one could deny that the mountain man worked with care and precision. Every log fit perfectly, every rope tied securely, every piece arranged thoughtfully. By the end of the week, the structure was complete. It was unlike anything the townspeople had seen before. From a distance, it appeared almost like a towering sculpture, a mix of natural wood and intricate design. Its shape was unusual, yet strangely harmonious with the surrounding mountains. The mountain man stepped back and looked at his work, his expression calm and satisfied. The town gathered in the field, murmuring among themselves. Some applauded quietly, others gasped in surprise. Children pointed and laughed, imagining all sorts of stories about the strange construction. Sister Agnes stood silently, her heart pounding with curiosity and uncertainty. She had expected something unusual, but this was beyond her imagination. "Why did you build this?" asked Mayor Thompson, stepping forward from the crowd. His voice was steady, but his eyes reflected the mix of awe and confusion he felt. "For the town," the mountain man replied simply. "It is meant to remind you that life is not always as it seems. You must look closely to understand." The townspeople walked around the structure, trying to understand it. It had platforms, angles, and spaces that could be climbed or explored. Children began to climb carefully under supervision, finding small hidden areas where they could peek through gaps in the wood. Adults inspected the craftsmanship, realizing that every joint was secure, every plank stable. Even the skeptics had to admit that it was built well and that it encouraged interaction and exploration. Despite this, not everyone was pleased. Some older townspeople shook their heads. "Why does it have to be so strange?" they muttered. Others complained that it distracted from the traditional values of the town. But the mountain man remained calm, unbothered by their words. He simply observed, knowing that change often made people uneasy at first. During the evening, the town held an informal gathering in the field. Families brought blankets, children ran and played, and the mountain man quietly observed from the edge, offering small suggestions to anyone who asked for help. He never demanded attention, yet the structure itself became the center of conversation. People began to share ideas about what it might represent: a symbol of growth, a celebration of creativity, a place where tradition met new ideas. Sister Agnes finally approached him. "It is remarkable," she said softly. "I still do not fully understand it, but I see that it has meaning." The mountain man smiled faintly. "Sometimes meaning is discovered slowly. It is not always given all at once." By the next morning, news of the mountain man's creation had spread beyond Willow Creek. Travelers passing through stopped to look, taking photos and asking questions. People from neighboring towns came to see the unusual structure, amazed by its size, design, and uniqueness. The mountain man remained humble, never asking for recognition, but silently proud that his work was appreciated. The structure became a gathering place for the town. Children played safely in its spaces. Adults used it as a meeting point for discussions. Even those who were initially skeptical began to accept it as part of Willow Creek. It had transformed from a mysterious and shocking creation into something that brought the community together. Yet, the mountain man knew this was only the beginning. His actions had challenged the town's expectations and encouraged them to see life differently. He had stirred curiosity, wonder, and sometimes frustration, but he had also opened a door for new ideas. He understood that true change often began with a single act that made people think, reflect, and question their routines. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the field, the townspeople looked at the structure and whispered to one another. They realized that this act, so bold, so unexpected, had transformed more than just a field. It had transformed their perspectives. It had reminded them that the world could hold surprises, even in the quietest of towns. The mountain man returned to his cabin that evening, watching the town from a distance. Children still played near the structure, laughing and climbing. Adults spoke quietly, discussing what they had seen and what it meant. The town was buzzing with conversation, ideas, and excitement. He smiled to himself, knowing that his work had already begun to create change. And so Willow Creek had learned an important lesson. Sometimes the most shocking act could bring people together, inspire imagination, and open hearts to new possibilities. The mountain man's creation had done all of this quietly, without a word of explanation, showing that actions often speak louder than words, and that sometimes the most unconventional acts can have the most meaningful impact. The mountain man's creation had become the talk of Willow Creek, and while many admired it, not everyone was pleased. Some townspeople whispered nervously about the structure, calling it strange, confusing, or even unnecessary. They could not understand why anyone would build something so unusual in the heart of their town. What had started as curiosity had now turned into tension. Conversations in the general store, at the post office, and along the main street were filled with murmurs of concern. Some claimed it disrupted the town's peaceful order. Others said it distracted the children from their chores and responsibilities. The town council decided it was time to take action. Mayor Thompson called an emergency meeting at the town hall, inviting all residents to voice their opinions. The hall was crowded that evening, with every seat taken and people standing along the walls. Families, farmers, shopkeepers, and even the children were present. Sister Agnes, though unsure of what to expect, attended quietly, curious to see how the community would react to the mountain man's unconventional work. Mayor Thompson began the meeting with a calm tone. "Friends, we are here to discuss the mountain man's structure in the field near the town square. Some of you are impressed, while others are concerned. Let us speak honestly and respectfully." Immediately, voices rose. Mr. Peters, a longtime farmer, stood up. "It's too tall. It's too strange. This is not how we do things in Willow Creek. Our town has always been about order, simplicity, and tradition. Why should we allow something so unusual to change that?" Mrs. Hopkins, the owner of the local bakery, shook her head. "I agree. It is confusing. The children are drawn to it like it's some kind of playground, and they ignore their chores. It's creating chaos." But then a younger voice spoke. It was Emma, the school teacher. "I disagree. Look at the children. They are learning. They are exploring, imagining, and thinking creatively." At Doubletown says, "Doubletown. The structure has brought excitement and curiosity. Isn't that a good thing?" Her words sparked murmurs among the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others frowned. The debate grew heated. People argued about safety, tradition, and the impact on the town's values. Some said it encouraged imagination. Others said it promoted disrespect for rules. Sister Agnes watched quietly, feeling the tension rise. Finally, Mayor Thompson raised his hands to quiet the room. "Please, everyone, let us hear from the mountain man himself. He is present and willing to speak." The mountain man stepped forward slowly. The hall grew silent, every eye on him. He did not raise his voice, but his presence demanded attention. "I built the structure for the town," he said calmly. "It was not meant to offend or disrupt. It was meant to encourage you to see things differently, to explore, to think, and to imagine. Life is not always simple or predictable. Change can be difficult, but it can also bring growth." Some townspeople whispered among themselves. Others frowned, unconvinced. Mr. Peters stood again, his voice sharp. "Growth? We do not need growth that comes in the form of confusing wooden towers. We have traditions for a reason." Emma, the schoolteacher, spoke up again. "Traditions are important, yes, but so is learning. The mountain man's creation allows our children to think, to question, and to understand the world in new ways. Isn't that valuable?" The room erupted into discussion once more. Voices overlapped, some angry, some supportive. Sister Agnes felt a strange mix of emotions: frustration, curiosity, and even admiration. The mountain man remained calm, never interrupting, only letting the townspeople express their thoughts. His silence, in a way, made his message stronger. The structure spoke for itself. Days passed, and the debate continued outside the town hall. Some townspeople posted signs around the square, either praising or criticizing the structure. Parents argued about whether their children should play near it. Shopkeepers noticed more visitors coming from nearby towns, asking questions and taking photographs. This brought a new type of attention that Willow Creek had never experienced before. Even Sister Agnes felt conflicted. On one hand, she respected the mountain man and admired his quiet courage. On the other hand, she could not ignore the concerns of the town. Some children were exploring the structure unsupervised, and she worried about their safety. She decided to visit the mountain man's cabin to speak with him privately. When she arrived, he was sitting outside, whittling a piece of wood with a small knife. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. "Sister Agnes," he said, looking up, "I can see your thoughts are troubled. I am concerned. The town is divided. Some are amazed by what you have done, but others are angry and confused. I do not know how to help them understand. The mountain man smiled faintly. Understanding takes time. People need to experience, to reflect, and to decide for themselves. I cannot force anyone to see what I see. My work is only to give them the opportunity. Sister Agnes nodded slowly.
You are patient, more patient than I am. But patience alone cannot calm everyone.
Some are determined to oppose anything new. That is natural, he said. Change always brings resistance, but even resistance teaches something. People begin to question their beliefs, their expectations. That is the start of growth. The next morning, tensions reached a peak. A small group of townspeople decided to confront the mountain man directly in the field. They approached the structure with caution, voices raised in concern. "We cannot allow this to continue," one of them shouted. "It is disruptive and confusing." The mountain man greeted them quietly. "I am not here to disrupt Bill. I am here to help the town grow in understanding." One man, red-faced with anger, gestured to the structure. "Grow? You call this growth? This is chaos." The mountain man calmly pointed to the children playing nearby. "Look at them. Are they not learning, exploring, and imagining? Is that not growth?" The argument continued for hours. People shouted, others defended the mountain man, and the children continued to play, blissfully unaware of the tension around them. Sister Agnes arrived to mediate, speaking gently to both sides. "We must listen and understand each other," she said. "We cannot allow anger to take over. Let us see the value in what has been created before judging too harshly." Some skeptics continued to frown, but they watched quietly, noticing the careful design of the structure and the happiness of the children. Even the critics could not deny that it had brought something new to the town, a sense of curiosity, imagination, and community engagement. Over the next few days, discussions continued in quieter ways. Small groups of people met to talk about the structure, sharing ideas and opinions. Some skeptics began to understand the mountain man's intentions. Others remained cautious, but they began to see that his work was not harmful. The town slowly started to find balance, learning that change and tradition could coexist. The mountain man observed all of this from the edges, quietly helping when needed, never forcing his ideas. He understood that lasting change required patience, understanding, and respect. By staying calm and consistent, he allowed the town to reach its own conclusions. By the end of the week, the field had become a gathering place for the community. Children explored safely, parents discussed ideas, and visitors from nearby towns marveled at the creativity. Even the most vocal critics began to accept that the mountain man's work had value, though they still questioned some of his methods. Sister Agnes, watching from a distance, finally understood. He has changed the town, she thought, not by force, but by showing us something new, something different. And in doing so, he has reminded us that growth often comes from unexpected places. And so Willow Creek began to change. The mountain man's structure had caused outrage, debate, and tension, but it had also sparked curiosity, imagination, and discussion. People learned to question their assumptions, to look at life from a different perspective, and to understand that not all change is bad. Some change, even when shocking at first, can teach lessons that last a lifetime. After weeks of discussion, debate, and curiosity, Willow Creek began to settle into a new rhythm. The mountain man's structure, once the cause of confusion and outrage, had become a familiar part of the town. Children continued to explore its nooks and platforms, their laughter echoing across the open field. Parents began to watch more closely, but did not forbid them, seeing the joy and learning it brought. Even some of the skeptics admitted that, strange as it seemed at first, It had a quiet charm that could not be denied. Sister Agnes, who had once been unsure and hesitant, walked through the field one crisp morning, taking in the snow-covered wooden structure glinting in the sunlight. She remembered the first day she had seen it, her shock, her worry, her uncertainty, and compared it to the scene before her now. Children played safely, climbing carefully, their imaginations alive. Adults spoke quietly nearby, exchanging observations about how the mountain man had changed their perspectives. It was not an easy change, and not everyone had embraced it fully, but a shift had happened. The mountain man watched from a distance, sitting quietly on a small rock at the edge of the field. He had always preferred to observe rather than explain, to allow actions to speak louder than words. He had seen skepticism, frustration, curiosity, and wonder all in the same eyes, and he knew that this was the real impact of his work. True change did not come through demands or lectures. It came from patience, presence, and the gentle challenge of seeing the world differently. Over the next several days, the townspeople began to approach him more openly. Mrs. Hopkins, the baker who had initially complained about the structure, walked up to him one morning with a small loaf of bread. I suppose I was too quick to judge," she said quietly. "Seeing the children enjoy it, and how careful you were, I realize now it has value." The mountain man nodded, accepting the gesture with humility. "Thank you. It is not meant to prove anything, only to give the town a chance to see differently." Even the older farmers who had resisted change began to notice the benefits. They watched as visitors from nearby towns arrived, curious to see the unusual structure. Some stayed for coffee, others explored the shops, and the town experienced a small but welcome boost in energy and connection. The mountain man had not intended to bring attention to Willow Creek, but it came naturally because his creation was both intriguing and inspiring. Sister Agnes approached him one afternoon, walking slowly through the field. She had been quiet in the debates and had observed his work with caution, but now she felt a sense of gratitude and respect. "You have changed our town," she said softly, "not just by building this structure, but by helping us see things in a new way. Even those who are resistant, I think they are beginning to understand." The mountain man smiled faintly. "Change is always challenging. People need time to accept it. I did not come to force understanding, only to offer an opportunity." "That you did," Sister Agnes said, nodding. "Ah, dod, ata, da." She watched as a group of children climbed carefully to the top of the structure, helping one another and learning to navigate safely. And we have taken that opportunity, perhaps more than we realized. The town council, once worried about safety and disruption, also began to recognize the benefits. They officially designated the field as a safe play and community area. Rules were established to ensure safety, and the structure was maintained carefully. What had begun as a shocking act had been transformed into a positive space that encouraged exploration, creativity, and cooperation. News of Willow Creek's unusual structure continued to spread. Travelers stopped to visit, often leaving gifts or small donations to help maintain it. The mountain man remained humble, never asking for recognition, content to observe the impact quietly. People began to respect him not just for his skill, but for his patience, wisdom, and ability to create change without forcing it. One evening, the mountain man sat near the edge of the field as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sister Agnes approached him, sitting beside him quietly. For a long time, neither spoke, just watching the beauty of the town bathed in the evening light. Finally, she said,
You have taught us an important lesson, I think.
That change, even when strange or shocking, can be good. That patience and understanding are stronger than anger or fear. That there is value in seeing differently. He nodded. Yes, the world is full of opportunities to learn, to grow, and to understand. Sometimes the hardest part is accepting that we may not see everything at first. Sister Agnes smiled. And sometimes the most unexpected people bring the greatest lessons. The mountain man chuckled softly, a sound rare but warm. Perhaps, but the lesson is not just mine. It belongs to the town now. You have all learned from this experience. You will carry it forward. Over the next few months, Willow Creek continued to flourish in small ways. Children learned to explore safely. Adults learned to discuss differences respectfully. And the town became a place of curiosity, imagination, and gentle acceptance. The mountain man's structure stood as a symbol, a reminder that even the most unconventional ideas could have meaning, and that growth often comes from the unexpected. Even skeptics who had once shouted and complained began to smile as they observed the joy it brought. They realized that their initial outrage had been part of the process, part of learning to embrace change. By witnessing, participating, and reflecting, the town had discovered a balance between tradition and innovation, between caution and curiosity. The mountain man himself continued his quiet life, moving through the town with the same calm presence he had always shown. He helped where he could, observed where needed, and spoke only when asked. He never sought fame, recognition, or reward. His satisfaction came from seeing the town grow, from watching people learn, reflect, and connect in new ways. One crisp winter morning, Sister Agnes visited him again, bringing a small notebook of drawings and ideas from the children. "They have been inspired by your work," she said. "They have created plans, drawings, and stories about the structure. Your act has inspired imagination beyond anything we could have imagined." The mountain man took the notebook. Flipping through the pages carefully, he smiled faintly. "That is enough," he said softly. "That is why I came here, to give a space for imagination, for learning, for growth." By the time spring arrived, the structure had become an integral part of Willow Creek. Festivals were held around it, school lessons incorporated its design, and visitors continued to arrive, marveling at its ingenuity. It had started as a shocking, unusual act, but it had transformed into something meaningful, respected, and cherished. The town had learned patience, understanding, and the value of seeing things differently. The mountain man, once an outsider and source of surprise, had become a quiet teacher, guiding the town without force or words. His presence reminded them that change, when approached thoughtfully, could bring joy, learning, and connection. On a warm spring evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the town prepared for another festival, Sister Agnes stood at the edge of the field, watching the children climb, laugh, and play. She looked toward the mountain man, who was sitting quietly nearby, observing the joy he had helped create. She smiled to herself, knowing that Willow Creek had grown in ways that could never be measured by rules or tradition alone. And so, the story of the mountain man and his unusual structure became a lasting memory for Willow Creek. It was a story of patience, courage, creativity, and understanding. A story that reminded everyone, children, adults, and visitors alike, that sometimes the most unexpected acts could change lives, inspire growth, and bring people together. Even years later, townspeople would tell the story to newcomers, how the quiet stranger arrived, how he shocked and surprised them, and how his act of creativity and patience transformed their little town forever. And in telling the story, they remembered the lesson at its heart. that patience, understanding, and openness to new ideas are the truest forms of strength.